now move over to measures for dispersion. And this is where our problem will get solved. And let's keep the class same. Let's say class A, class B. Class A was what? 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13. Class B was 1, 2, 3, 17, 18, 19. These were our classes. Both mean and median are, making a fraud out of us. They've given us the same value, indicating that, these two classes are just the same. But now what we do is, which is what all statisticians will do. They never use measures for central tendency as standalone measures. They don't treat it as standalone measures. They always use it in conjunction with a measure for dispersion. Because what's the problem between these two classes? Logically thinking about it, if you don't know what dispersion is altogether, if you look at these two classes, what's the difference between these two classes? What's the difference here in between these two classes?
The range, the minimum.
The inequality, right? Inequality. These two classes are, there's a huge lot of differences between different people in one of the classes. In the other class, it's quite equal. So you need to create some measure for, equality, and some measure for spread, how spread out the data is. Is the data very close to the measure for central tendency that you have, or is it too spread out from that measure for central tendency? Now, in that direction, we look at certain measures. The first one is range. Range, as the number indicates, is simply your min and max. You look at the min and max value and you compute max minus min. So obviously your mean and median for A and B are the same. So it's 10 for this class, 10 for this class, 10 for this class, 10 for this class. But now you start coupling it with measures for dispersion. The first one of that is range. Now range is max minus min. For class A, what is that going to be? 13 minus 7. So that's 6. For class B, that suddenly becomes 18. Right? So this is the first point of difference that we are able to establish between these two classes. With a value for range, this is one of the most basic measures that we've gotten to understand variability inside my population. So it can be a population of equals, it can be a population of unequals, try and get that sense. If we can quantify that equality inside the population, for that purpose, in that direction, we are trying to figure out measures for dispersion. So range immediately tells me that class B is much more spread out, which means that if I've gotten a central tendency measure there, I'll have lesser trust on that central tendency measure as being a good indicator of what every kid in that class looks like. Whereas if I've got a small range, then that means that whatever central tendency measure I've gotten will be very close to what most of the people are. I can immediately start figuring that out. So this is my first measure, which is range. The second measure that we've gotten is an interquartile range. Which is called IQR. For that, let's go over to the next page. And we'll pick another data set, a simpler data set for this. That let's say 1, 2, 3, 10. Just a second. 10, 17, 18, 19. Now to compute the interquartile range, we need two values. We need quantile 1, we need quantile 3. What is quantile 1? It's the 25th percentile value. What is Q3? It's the 75th percentile value. We already know what Q2 is. Can you guess?
50th percentile.
That's median, right?
Yep.
So that's median, 50th percentile value. Let's quickly find these values out. Now, median is very easy. So there are 7 points here. So 7 plus 1 by 2, that's fourth. The fourth point becomes your Q2. Now, how to find Q1 and Q3? To find Q3, you go over to the right side and compute the median of the right side.
18.
So the right side is 17, 18 and 19. So 3 data points, which means that the median will be this one. So this becomes your Q3. You then come to the left, do the same thing. This one becomes your Q1. All right. This is how we compute the 25th and the 75th percentile value, which get called as quantile 1 and quantile 3. Quantile 2 we've already known. So here IQR or interquartile range refers to the value Q3 minus Q1. So when you calculate Q3 minus Q1, we get a sense of your interquartile range. Acha. Here in this case, it's 16. Now, based on what discussion we've done, can you tell me one, I'm already telling you that IQR is a little better than range. Can you tell me why? And we've already discussed this point. That's a hint. We've not discussed this in the context of IQR and range, but we've discussed this. IQR is a little better than range.
But maybe it gives an idea of how many, what is it, 50% of data, where is it lying?
Yes, definitely you're true.
It tells the dispersion. It tells the spread of the data.
Yes, both of them do. IQR also gives you a sense of the spread. Range also gives you a sense of the spread. But then I'm telling you that IQR is a little better at doing it.
Because it tells what
And
percentage
then
of population.
outliers
Because
may-
range will not give you the population. It only gives you the min and max. Whereas the quartile will give you what percentage of population above or
The Q3 value minus the Q1 value. So it's a point value only.
Outliers won't be affecting this value, IQR,
Correct. Absolutely.
right? Yeah.
When we use range as a measure, what do we pick? We pick the minimum value and we pick the maximum value.
correct.
If you get outliers in the data, those outliers will be on these two sides, the fringes of the population, which means that when you compute the range, it will use those outlier values to compute the range. When actually the data set might be much more smaller than that range, because you can suddenly have 1000 values like this and one value which is minus 1000 and another value which is 1000. And all the other values are scores for a test. Right? It can happen like this and still your range would come out as 2000, but most of the values in your population, the other 998 values in your population are in the range of 0 to 20. So range as a metric for dispersion is again sensitive to outliers just like mean was, whereas IQR, what it does is that it does not care about the starting 25% of the data because it starts off at the 25th percentile value, and it does not care about the last 25% of the data. So it only considers the middle 50%. So it's a very good measure of central tendency. You understand? It's a measure for dispersion or spread inside the central values. It leaves out 25% of the values on either side of the data. Now, because this is a very small data set here, it's only just 1 point and 1 point. But in larger data sets, when you check out the 25th percentile value, that's eliminating the starting 25%. And the 75th percentile eliminates the bottom 25 percentile. You get my point?
Yep.
Acha, somebody is saying, what if the outlier is at Q1 or Q3? Acha. Calling something an outlier means that they are rare values, right? If it's rare, there is no chance that it can come at the 75th percentile value. Because if you're saying that your 75th percentile value is an outlier, then your definition of an outlier is incorrect, which means that there are 25% values more that are even further away than the outlier. And you can't call 25% of your data as an outlier data point. Then it becomes part of the distribution. Just because a number is way more than other number does not mean that it will become an outlier. If your value at Q1 and Q3, if you think it is an outlier, then your definition for outlier needs to change. Because if your value at Q3 is an outlier, then all the points beyond it are outliers, and there are 25% of points that are beyond it. So you can't say that 25% of my outlier is of my data is an outlier data point. The purpose of calling something an outlier means that it has to be rare. It's not common. If it was common, it would not be an outlier. You understand the literal meaning of outlier, right? It's like an outlaw. You don't have your 50% of your country is built by outlaws, then that country will not hold for a long time. You get my point? People who said that Q1 and Q3 could be outliers. It could not. If your Q1 and Q3 seem like outliers,
Yes.
then the definition of outlier needs
But in most of
Rahul, just one question. When we consider IQR, we are considering only 50% of the data.
Okay.
25% is left, and also on the right we are leaving 25%.
Mhm.
So can we also go for, so which means we are just going with just the 50% of the data, right?
Using that to
Is
compute.
that
Yes.
okay? Or can we also go for other ranges, which is maybe 10 percentile or something of that sort?
You very well can, but you wouldn't be able to call it interquartile range then. You can say that the range of values in which my middle 80% of the data lies, or 90% of the data 80% lies. How do I do that? I use the 10th percentile and I use the 90th percentile. And I say that the middle 80% of my data lies inside this range. You can do that, but you can't then call it IQR. Because IQR is the difference between your first and third quartile.
So Rahul, if I get it correctly, so values between Q1 and Q3, which is our IQR, are the most common values in the data set.
Yes, they lie in the absolute center of your distribution.
Okay, so the probability that, not probability, basically that if I see any number, for example, if it's 10, 15, 20, and my IQR is around 13, then 10 will become an outlier?
No. Anything beyond 25 and 75 cannot be called an outlier. Otherwise, you would be saying
Okay, yeah.
that your
Sorry.
data is an outlier.
Okay.
That it
So
does not
my
mean
range will
outlier.
be Q1 and Q3.
Yes, for calculating interquartile range and for considering it as a measure for dispersion inside my data, I say that I need to look at my first quantile value and my 25th quantile, third quantile value and find out the difference. That difference will give me a sense of the spread.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Rahul, to rephrase my question slightly, so why is IQR popular? Why don't we consider the 10th percentile or the 90th percentile range, which would constitute more number of data? So why is that IQR is
You can very well use
preferred?
that for some analysis that you're trying to conduct. This has sort of been standardized as a measure for dispersion. Does not mean that for all use cases, it's just the Q1 and the Q3 that matter. So mathematically, there's an IQR based approach to identify outliers. That approach goes like this. If your X is less than Q1 minus 1.5 IQR, or it is greater than Q3 plus 1.5 IQR, we call it an outlier. This is how we identify outliers. This is an IQR based approach to identify outliers. For different kinds of analysis, you can use different percentages. Don't get hung up on the percentage. This percentage is just like a standard definition.
Okay.
So we use several standard definitions in science, right? You've got to standardize something, only then people can learn. You need to get value out of it. You need to understand why they've done it. They've done it to sort of look at the center of the distribution and leave out the fringes. Here, your argument is right that why leave out 50% of the data? That's true. But then this is a standard accepted definition for a measure, one measure for dispersion. There are several other measures for dispersion that are much better than this. You know, one challenge with this measure is what? That it leaves out 50% of the data completely. That's a challenge that you're very well thinking. That's what's in your head, which is why this question is coming out, right? that you're not worrying about the rest of the 50% of the data. You're just looking at the middle 50%. Maybe there is a much higher dispersion in the rest of the 50%, which you sort of miss out. That's true. That can very well be the case. But this is one standard definition and one standard way in which we do it. There are other ways as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And for some analysis, there'll be several analysis where you will see that you will be concerned with the, you will look at a
So Rahul, I have posted one query.
just let me just finish this thought and then you can ask a question. So there'll be observation. You will see that we eliminate 2.5% on either side of the distribution. We say that these are outliers. We don't worry about this Q1 minus 1.5 IQ or Q3. We say that the fringe 5% of the distribution I'm going to eliminate. So that's a call that I will take based on the data that I'm looking at. So these things happen, they do happen, but then this is one standard measure. So and there's good sense in this measure. You're trying to eliminate anything that lies towards the fringes. You're trying to keep the middle 50%. And you're calling that the central sort of set of values. And you're looking at the range of that central set. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I posted Raghu. So I have problem with mic. I have posted my question. Please look.
Okay, you put it in the chat. Okay. How can we expect outliers to be present at first or last portion of data points?
Yes, yeah.
In ideal business scenario, we can't expect the data pattern, right? Or do we need to sort the data? Yes, yes, this is inside a sorted environment. Once you sort, so let's say you've got there'll be some months which will have very low sales. There'll be some months which will have very high sales. They will lie in the fringes always, right? Sales, you can't really call them outliers always, but outliers are points that we are saying do not fit the general bill. You know, typically values lie in a given range. In some cases, values lie way off that range, and those values are then called outliers. So it's a mathematical concept that has been created. So it will always lie on the fringes because you're sorting the data. You get my point?
Okay, got it. Got it. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, yes, Rahul. Yeah, thanks.
All right, so this is an IQR, which is an interquartile range. So let's go back to our class. Here's the class. One back, I think. Yes, so what's the IQR for the two classes?
Class is 16.
What values are you choosing? Just tell me what that value is.
So class A is 12 minus 8.
12 minus 8. No, it's not 12 minus 8. It's 7 plus 8 by 2. That's 7.5. 12 plus 13 by 2. That's 12.5. 12.5 minus 7.5. That's 5. That's the IQR. It's an even set of values. You've got to keep that in mind. Here again, it's 0.5 and 18.5. So it is 1.5, 18.5. Difference is 17. So IQR is 17. Okay. Now there's a problem with both these ideas. So we've discussed two ways. Obviously, we are now able to differentiate between class A and class B. That problem is solved to an extent. But there's still some problems that exist with these two approaches. What's that problem? The problem is what several of you have sort of pointed out, or at least it's in your heads when you ask these questions, is that these are both measures again that are only considering two data points. They're just picking up two data points, and based on those two data points, you are getting you're trying to capture the insight, you're trying to understand the dispersion of a data set. Now your population, let's say, has 1000 data points. This is a population of 1000 data points. Out of these data points, you choose two, which is Q1 and Q3. You sort the whole thing, choose Q1, Q3, and based on this, you find the IQR, or you use two, you calculate the min, the max, and based on this you give me a sense of the distribution of the population, how spread out the population is or how closely knit the population is. But then both of these seem like, sort of substandard solutions, right? Because why in a population of 1,000 data points, how can just 2 data points give you a sense of how dispersed the population is? Do you agree with that thought?
Yeah.
This seems sort of like an impaired solution, a sort of substandard solution, which led people to believe that you've got to create a solution that, one, it works effectively with whatever central tendency measure that you're using. 2, let's not just use 2 values to get a sense of the entire population. Here there are 5-6 values, so it's okay. But if it's a population of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions, why would you use just 2 values to get the sense of range? Which brings us to the most useful set of values, which is variance and standard deviation. Now, standard deviation is under root variance. So these are very close. We'll discuss what variance is, and under root of that value will become standard deviation. Now, what's variance? The formula for variance goes like this. It's sigma xi minus mu whole square by n. So basically what you are doing is xi is every unique point in your population. Mu is the mean of the population. So you're using a central tendency measure. So let's get back to the case that we are looking at. Let's pick one of the classes and I'll ask you to do it for the other class. Let's say the first class we look 7, 8, 9, 11, 12 and 13. Now the idea here is to first find out the mean. First find out the mean of this entire population. That mean came out as 10. Then what we do is we compute the distance of every point in the population from that mean. And that is the real value that we are looking at, right? When we use a measure for central tendency, we use a point estimate for an entire set of values. What we want to add onto that information is how different every point in that population is from that average estimate. If I know that also, then my solution is more or less, quite useful. Do you agree with that? If you know what a point estimate is, and then how far off every point in the population is from that point estimate, then using both these together will become a very useful metric. Does that make intuitive sense? Okay, let's look at the calculation in that case. If it's not making sense, it should now. So what we are going to do now is first we've computed a mu. So this is one answer that you've given to the headmaster that, on average people score 10. Now let's say he's not convinced and you've got to give him an additional number. So what you do is you compute how far away people are from 10. You basically compute x minus mu. Now this x minus mu is how? 7 minus 10 is minus 3. This is minus 2. This is minus 1. 11 is 1. This is 2. This is 3. Can you explain what is it? You've gone back. What happened? What are you missing? Have you just joined or what? Central tendency? What is it that you want to understand? Why is it called central tendency? Sai Pravalika. Can you tell me what is it that you're trying to ask?
What central tendency is, what exactly it means.
You're talking about this.
Am I audible?
Yeah, got your point. I'm failing to understand where you missed the conversation, because then probably you missed the whole thing after this, is it?
Sorry, actually I got lost. So that's why I got confused maybe.
Okay, so see,
I mean, I understand what mean, median, everything. I just want to know what is central tendency.
the central tendency is basically it sort of summarizes a population, gives you one point value and tells you that this population sort of behaves like this number. So if you're looking at ages of 100 people and somebody asks you that what does the sample look like, and you say that, you know, the average age is 35, then people will think that on an average people in that population are 35 years old, which means that if I randomly pick out 5, then most of them will be close to 35. That's the expectation out of a central tendency measure. A central tendency tries to indicate how a population looks like on an average.
Okay, okay, okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get back here. Okay. So so right now we've gotten a measure of a central tendency. We are saying that this population looks like 10. So on an average, students will score 10. But then now we want to find out every individual student, how different from 10 is he? Now, this is how different they are. This person is -3, this person is -2, this person is -1. So -3 indicates that he's lesser than 10 by that number. Minus or +3 would indicate he's more than 10 by that number. Now, the ideal scenario would be to find an average of this. Average of x minus mu. If I find an average of this, that would tell me on an average how different people are from the central tendency measure. If I compute an average of this, it will come out as 0. Right? -3, 3 cancel out, -2, 2 cancels out, -1, 1 cancels out. So it will become a 0. Now, why did this happen? This happened because we are treating 7 and 13 differently, which we should not. Why should we not treat them differently? Because 7 is as away from 10 or as different from 10 as 13 is. It does not matter whether you are lesser than 10 or more than 10. You're different from 10. That's what we are trying to capture with dispersion. That's what we are trying to capture with spread. I don't care whether you're lesser than the central tendency measure or greater. What I care about is how different you are from the central tendency measure. Does that idea make sense? That if we compute a simple average of this x minus mu, we are sort of offsetting these differences. We're sort of normalizing these values. Is it making sense?
So we are basically saying that how not far away, but how different is it, regardless of what sign it comes to be.
Correct.
So it's 3 points different on either side.
True. It could be different on either side. We are only concerned with, on an average, how different all the points in the population are from the central tendency measure. Because we are going to use the central tendency measure as a point estimate. If I add this number to that central tendency measure, then I get a sense. Together, when I read both, I'll be able to sort of figure out, okay, if I'm saying that something on an average is 10 and the variance is 30, then that we'll see how we ultimately interpret it for both the classes. But then a lower variance or a lower standard deviation would indicate that values are close to the central tendency measure, whereas a higher value would indicate that they are further away from it. So higher inequality and lower inequality. Now, one of the ways in which we can solve this plus minus problem, there are two ways. Either you take an absolute value. We know what absolute value is. Mod of x is what? Minus x if x is less than 0 and x if x is greater than 0. You know the absolute value function?
Yeah.
So there are two solutions to it. We either take an absolute value. In that case, this becomes a 3, this becomes a 2, this becomes a 1, 1, 2, and 3. And we take an average of this. All right. And that becomes a measure for we take an average of this. Let's go to the other page actually. So we found out x minus mu. X minus mu came out as -3, -2, -1, 1, 2, and 3. Now there are two solutions. We compute a mod of x minus mu. That makes it 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, and 3. And then we do a mod of x minus mu by n. So we basically compute an average. So we say that 3 plus 3, 6, 2 plus 2, 4. So that's 10 plus 2, 12. 12 by 6 is 2. So on an average, people are different by 2 units. So the average, so now what we say is, now this term is called MAD. Mean absolute deviation. But this is not very popular as a measure for variance. We did not even list it. I'll tell you that story. It's a nice, interesting story of two scientists. We'll talk about that at the end. But then there's another solution to this problem as well. Instead of taking an absolute value, what you can do is you can square these numbers. All these numbers where there are signs involved and you want to eliminate the sign problem, then you can square these numbers. So what will that do? -3 will become 9, this will become 4, this will become 1, and then 1, 4, and 9. So now 9 and 9 are the same thing. So -3 and 3 now get treated as both as 9. So they're both the same thing. And then you take an average of this. This term, this sigma x minus mu whole square by n, this is called variance. So compute the variance: 13, 26, 28 by 6. So variance is 28 by 6. So that's how much? 4.646, ऐसे कुछ चलेगा, 4.64. This becomes your variance, and your standard deviation would be under root of this 4.64. Let's say 2.12 or something. Now, these are both similar measures. MAD is slightly lower than this squaring and under root. So squared term is called the variance term, which is sigma x minus mu whole square. Why did we do the squaring? We did that squaring to sort of eliminate this normalization effect that's happening. So -3 and 3 get cancelled out, which we do not want because they're both equally different. We want to treat them similarly. So there are two solutions to it. One is to take an absolute value and the other one is to take a square. Now this squared one is called variance, and this became very popular. Now historically what had happened was there were two scientists, Gauss and Laplace. Have you heard of these two people?
Yeah.
Laplace was also a very famous scientist. He has a lot of other equations that are attributed to him. Gauss was a very famous guy, Carl Friedrich Gauss. He gave you that formula for addition of natural numbers. This is n plus 1 by 2, then 1 square plus 2 square. This also formula he gave. Do you know at what age this formula? This formula you remember? I think sometime in 8, 9, 10, sometime it gets taught, right? In quantitative and all you learn this. This is n plus 1, 2n plus 1 by 6. And then there's 1 cube, 2 cube, 3 cube. Can you guess at what age we discovered this? Boss.
7 or 8.
The ripe old.
Oh my God.
He was 5 years old when he
Wouldn't have guessed.
One of your voices is breaking. Is it breaking for everybody or is it just me? It seems like a song.
Clear now.
Yeah. So this guy, he was also a brilliant chap. Laplace was also a brilliant chap. Laplace suggested the MAD approach. Gauss suggested the variance approach. Unfortunately, Gauss won that war. Now machine learning engineers prefer MAD over variance. We will see several other applications. So this problem where you have plus minus signs and these signs keep neutralizing each other out. And how do you solve this problem? This problem you will keep facing when you go to linear regression. You will again face this problem. Later on, you'll keep facing this problem. So a popular solution to it became the squaring solution, and this was the mod solution. Now, both these scientists heavily, they were very vocal about their own solutions. They wanted to make their solutions become popular, but Gauss won that war for the very simple reason that calculus was very young then. Calculus had just been discovered by Newton, and y is equal to x square and y is equal to mod x. If you look at these mathematical equations, so y is equal to x square looks like this, the function. If you look at y is equal to mod x, it's like this. These are the two graphs. This is y is equal to x square, this is y is equal to mod x. Now this is a differentiable function, and differentiation was an important step because it was used for maxima and minima. to compute maximum and minimum values of a function, which was a very popular application, something that they consistently needed to do, scientists. Now this is a differential function all through. At every point y is equal to x square is differentiable. Unfortunately, y is equal to mod x is not differentiable at this point. Because of these sharp turns, it's not differentiable here. So because of a problem with differentiating, this function did not become as popular as this function. The squaring function became much more popular, and Gauss's idea became so popular. We keep using variance even now. And this fellow, poor guy, but Laplace has so many other things that are attributed to him. Some very wonderful things in physics and maths also. Laplace equations and a lot of things that has been attributed to this guy. So it's not like the real, bechara person was who discovered calculus. So right now we only know Newton as the father of calculus, but there were two people at the same time they had proposed calculus. I'm forgetting the name of the other guy. I think it was
Leibniz. Leibniz is one.
Leibniz. True. Sorry. Leibniz. So there are two people at the same time they had proposed their theories, individual in different parts of the world. So there was no chance that one of them had copied from the other. So they both discovered it together. It was just that Newton got into that Principia journal and he became famous, and all of calculus was attributed to him. And Leibniz was never got that credit. But Leibniz has his own set of contributions to maths. So it's not like Leibniz did not become popular. In fact, there's a Newton-Leibniz theorem also. So both of these guys have worked together also later on. But in far away different parts of the world, they both came up with the ideas of calculus together. One of them did not get the credit. Here, Laplace did not get too much credit for MAD, but now ML engineers are all for MAD. This seems a little strange to say, it's MAD and all, but still, it's a good measure. So both of them do the same thing for you, but there's a nice bit of history that is associated with these two ideas. So coming back to forgetting the history. Can you do this for class B and then we'll stop today's session, finish off and then come back next weekend? Can you find out the standard variance for class B?
Yeah, I used Excel, so it's
Smart. That's a smart. That's an solution to this problem. Good one. Okay. I think if you use Excel, you'll get it very quickly. So you'll see that this variance will be much larger. The variance for class B should be significantly larger than class A.
77.6 for class B and 5.6 for class A.
Okay. 77.6 and 7.6. So
5.6.
when you do standard deviation, this will be some 2 point something, and this will be some 8.8 or 8.9. So the difference is quite significant. So we look at standard deviation because standard deviation is in the scale of the values that you're looking at. Variance is in the squared scale because we are doing x minus mu whole square and then taking a mean of that. So we are taking an average of squared numbers. So it's in a higher scale. So variance is a little more difficult to read as compared to standard deviation. Standard deviation is close to the original. So number 2 indicates that on an average, your points in your population are different from the central tendency measure by 2 units versus 8.8 units. So this makes it very clear. So central tendency alone is not a very good measure, like several of you pointed out when we started off with the idea of mean. But when you use a measure for central tendency in conjunction with a measure for dispersion, then it all sort of connects together. You get my point? How these two in conjunction work very well, but standalone, they might not be good measures.